And we are live. It is a
Oh
great,
man.
it's there. We're live. We're here. We are online. Happy Friday. Jackie, how are you doing?
I had to take my husband to the doctor to get staples taken out of his head this morning, but other than that,
Well, I have a question. I have a question. Were you the reason why there's staples in his head?
I am.
There
Uh,
we go.
turns out if you rub somebody's shoulders vigorously enough, you can actually make them pass out, which he did, and then hit his head.
Ouch.
He has not filed a temporary restraining order, and I'm not wearing a ring because I don't like them, not because we're separated. Oh, I swear. But I'm glad it's Friday, and
Right.
I'm sure that he's a lot more likely to make it through TSA without the staples in his head. So,
There we go. Well, I'm glad to see that. I mean, it wasn't a baseball bat or a car or something like that that created the staples. So, hey,
no.
I mean, hey, the whole theme of, good intentions, rubbing someone's shoulder, you have good intentions. You don't mean to make them.
Yeah. Yeah. We were in the doctor's office, and I was like, I really was trying to be nice, I swear.
So doctor's like, yeah, sure. Like looking like, give me your,
Yeah.
we're looking at your husband's like, you got a safety word?
I
You
know
want
my husband's like,
yeah. This is a get back to the task at hand. So it's, it's a good day. How's the weather? How hot is it in Arizona?
it's actually cooling off here. It's only 102 degrees right now.
Wow.
But that's actually compared to the 115 we've had for the last couple of weeks. It's been nice.
Yeah, it's 97 in Atlanta with about 80% humidity. So it is about as miserable as it can be.
No, that's not for me, dog.
Yeah, it's not for me either. It's just the air conditioning. My air conditioning bill is going to be pretty interesting this month, but it is what it is.
Yeah, our air conditioner went out at our ranch house, so we had to use portable air conditioners for 3
Ooh.
weeks last month, and I just got a $630 electric bill.
Oh yeah, there you go. It is going to be something. So we are here today. We are just at Blackhat. We are going to share give our recap, give our opinions, give some colorful opinions about Blackhat. Jackie's blog has been released, so I encourage everyone to take a look at it. So Jackie, tell me what's your recap of Blackhat?
Well, the title of my blog was "The Future is Artificial," so I think Blackhat was interesting. Blackhat seemed a little bit more business focused this year, a little bit more scaled back, which I would not say is a bad thing. And I think we all went there expecting everybody and their brother to be talking about AI, which was the case. So, yeah, it was really hot, way too much traffic. If anybody has not been to Vegas lately, their F1 racing is coming to Vegas. So they're in the middle of building a giant F1 track, and the traffic was horrendous. But yeah, it was an interesting experience. I felt like the crowd skewed far more technical and investor this year, and a lot fewer people who literally were just like, because every year they're the people that I call it swag surfing. They've just got like 8 tote bags and they're literally just grabbing and stuffing. And I don't know what they do with the stuff, but there were way fewer of those people this year.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, they're good crowds. I mean, I was especially glad to see that. I mean, there were more people than I thought there were going to be. I was just judging by the conference that we were just at in Vegas a couple of weeks beforehand for CribleCon, and where traffic and where the budgets, travel budget cutbacks have really impacted travel. But I was good to see for
Yeah.
Blackhat. There was a goodly number. There wasn't as many as in past times, so that's kind of good. It wasn't overrun. I like the mix. And people, a lot of conversations, a lot of struggle, a lot of the security teams, they're looking for help. They're looking for those bullets to say, how do we solve these problems? So it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I mean, it's great
Yeah.
news.
Yeah. I had, from a company perspective too, it was really awesome this year, because last year, maybe 1 out of every 10 people I talked to had even heard of us before. But this year it was pretty unusual that somebody hadn't heard of us or didn't know what we do. Like typically it's like, yeah, I've heard of you. Like, I think you guys do data stuff, right? So many people who are like, oh, I'm using you, or my friend is currently, going through a proof of value with you guys. So it was really, really nice just to see us as a company, our profile kind of grow year to year. It made me really proud.
Yeah, it was really impressive. You're exactly right. Very few people who just like, what do y'all do? That really wasn't there anymore. And especially there we go. Chris Owen, the man, the legend. I am guilty of swag surfing. Thank you, Chris, for viewing. We appreciate it. Hey, why don't you share some pictures? Actually, you know what? Can't do that. But hey, send me some pictures of your swag. We'll show them off.
Who had it? Will actually put in the chat who had the best swag. What's the single best swag item you got? Last year I got those snack, like the mini chopstick things. Somebody was giving out the little mini chopsticks, which are great when you're working at your computer because you can use those to eat so you don't get your computer dirty. And don't get me wrong, I swag surf too. Like I have 3 kids. So the only way I get away with going to hacker summer camp is if I bring home a bag full of crap. So,
there you go. Nice.
Yeah. Yep. I'm not going to name names, but I think we also both noticed that there were a handful of larger companies whose booths were scaled back this year. Some of whom some of the booths were so small I couldn't find them, right. It's interesting. I think everybody's kind of going through budget cutbacks right now. So the way that manifests seems to be different amongst different companies. There were still some of the kind of marquee, large booths that are there every year. But yeah, I think the pullback was noticeable.
Yeah, it really was. But others were companies I've never heard of, had an enormous booth. We had a booth next to us who would just, it was, covered us up like a raincoat. And I was just like, what? Where is this? So it's just, so the marketing capital was being deployed in abundance, for a lot of companies too. It was pretty impressive. But you're right. One of my favorite companies, it's just a little tiny booth. But you know what? I think you have to look. Companies have to look. Are we, getting a payback from this massive investment?
Yeah. Well, and I think, I think if it doesn't coincide with, if you don't have anything to talk about, you might not get any real benefit from being there. So I think the decision to go smaller on a booth, if you don't have some like major product release or something that you're pushing right now, is not necessarily bad. Now I'm also really jealous because I didn't get a Mandalorian backpack.
Yeah, I know.
What the heck?
Pretty cool. Tell me about it. Hey, so Anton from Google has this great term. He calls it clown marketing, of all the broadcasts and the nonsense that you see at these shows. So can you give me some examples of what do you consider just overblown nonsense that you didn't see this year from past shows, and what's the new overblown nonsense that's there now?
I saw Dean Cain at somebody's booth.
Oh, there you go.
And then I told somebody under 40 that, and they were like, "Who's Dean Cain?" And I was like, "Exactly." And I showed him a picture, and I was like, "He was Superman." And they're like, "That guy was Superman?" I'm like, I know, but trust me.
Well, hey, you know what? When I need cybersecurity advice, Dean Cain is the first person I think about. So,
Yeah, definitely. If Chadwick Boseman's not available, if there's nobody else from Marvel or DC that I can ask, if there's no other cast members, then I definitely have Dean Cain on speed dial.
There we go.
So that kind of it was interesting. There were more like party takeovers, I think. Mm-hmm. He was he was disguised as a retired actor. And I didn't, but I wanted to ask him if he was violating the SAG-AFTRA strike by being there, but I didn't ask him that. But no, I think there were actually fewer of those things. So I saw more like event takeovers, more like happy hours and parties, but there were fewer of the just overt like crazy things. I was really happy to see more espresso machines. Can we that needs to be a thing. So I want espresso machines at every booth. Personally, I'd rather have that than the cocktails. I did see that though. There were a couple of companies who were just like, screw it, we're just going to get people drunk.
Right. That's one way to do it. One of the things I was glad to stop seeing so much XDR will solve all your problems. Because that's always been kind of a first off, what is it and how is it going to solve my problems? So I thought that. So I was glad to see that finally settle down.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I I actually, as an analyst, one of my oops moments was giving some pretty frank feedback about XDR to the CEO of an extremely large security company because I didn't know that's who it was. And I was like, it's basically like EDR with some type of automation, and it's usually just like locking a 360 account. It's not actually like automated response, right? And so I am a big fan of XDR in conjunction with some pieces of AI, which I think we're going to get into, because if we look at the number, and this is something we were talking about earlier, if we look at the number of alerts that are just not being looked at on a daily basis, there are definitely some pieces of that can pretty easily and seamlessly be automated if, and this is the big caveat, if you have enough information and context to make decisions. But the problem is that XDR is usually retail therapy. It's not a thoughtful reimagining of your security stack. It's like, oh, we'll just get something that automatically does stuff, and that'll solve our problem with alerts not being triaged. And that's not how XDR works. So as with any automation systems are only as good as the information you feed them and your ability to monitor and tune the feedback loop associated with them. So I'm a believer in XDR because there's a lot of things that your tier 1 security analysts are doing that XDR can probably do, but it's not a product. It's an entire way to reorganize your response. And that's, I don't think that enough organizations go into it with the understanding that you have to take a much larger step to get XDR to actually work for you. But apparently it just isn't a thing anymore. So apparently, like I think I saw one booth that had something about XDR actually up out on the booth, but everybody's just going to, and it's just AI now. And it's really fascinating, right? Thinking about
all your problems.
If somebody had tried to sell XDR as AI powered security a year ago, it would never have flown. It would not have worked. People would have been like, oh, okay. And it's insane to think the extent to which our trust or faith in AI has shifted, or our willingness to think about ways that we can apply it, because AI is a pretty freaking broad term for basically just making a computer do something that mimics, being the key term, human behavior, right? It's not actually human behavior. It just mimics things like decision making, problem solving. And they're really all just these like super complex decision trees, right?
Exactly. I mean, forms of AI have been in security products for a very, very long time. So this is just, it's not like this has just happened. Now, I do like to see, I think, especially large language models, I think have a lot of ways to help. Like you mentioned, tier 1 SOC analysts. Here's a case, here's the automatic enrichment, here's the steps to flow through, to help make people more productive. And I think that is, very much so within reach. But you always have to ask yourself, are you going to trust your security to something that's maybe about 70% right? And I think do you help? Does it help your security to be 70% right? Absolutely. But do you trust your security is a kind of a different way to look at it.
Yeah. And I think it's the difference between like the concept of, autopilot versus like adaptive cruise control. Right. And like I had a vehicle starting in 2012 that had adaptive cruise control. Adaptive cruise control is a fantastic co-pilot, not really a great pilot.
And as opposed to, I think, and you're looking at autopilot. I love this shot from San Francisco. People get mad at the driverless cars. They put a traffic cone. Guess what? They stop.
Yeah, they stop and they can't move again because you broke their brain.
Right, broke their brain.
Yeah, and this is like full self-driving in a city that's not designed for full self-driving is the same thing as trying to use AI or XDR on a security stack that's not designed for automated responses. And that's the key here, is that yes, AI can absolutely make a fundamental difference to your security stack. But as a data scientist, AI is garbage in, garbage out. If you are making a decision with bad information, you're going to get a bad decision. And so it's not as easy as we're going to implement AI in our security stack, because AI can actually do a lot of really cool things in security. It can do anomaly detection. It can find zero-day exploits that you never even knew existed. There are a lot of things, but a lot of those things require a lot of freaking data. And here's the other thing is like, that all costs money. The more complex the decision you're making, the more expensive it is. And so there's also this trade-off between what it costs for a tier 1 SOC analyst, and a lot of times they're based not in the US, and like they're not that expensive because they're entry-level security analysts. Can they make those decisions more inexpensively from, to your point, an accuracy perspective? Right. Is a tier 1 analyst going to be more than 70%? Yeah. And compute, because compute is not cheap.
Right. As NVIDIA improved yesterday. So I mean that price is definitely there.
Yeah. And that's I think yeah, well, and that's another big thing. So Ken is pointing out that putting garbage in a machine learning model is an attack vector. And yeah, so what's the shift that we're starting to see, right, is large language models are phenomenal. I love ChatGPT and Bard. I use them almost every day. I don't use their output as is. They're a great starting point, or a great way to make sure that you've covered all the pieces of a topic that you think you want to cover. They're a great way to see if your SEO is on point. But the thing with ChatGPT and Bard is that they're basically just fancy autocorrect. So they're not really creating original thought. They're literally just connecting pieces of other people's thoughts together based on their understanding of how those pieces have been connected in the past. And so an interesting thing is that a lot of companies have said, okay, these tools are powerful and we want to use them, but we can't just use information scraped from the internet for a number of reasons. One, a lot of it is violating copyright and licensing, which is a whole issue with large language models we're not going to get into today. But so they're creating their own in-house large language models, right? So it's like, okay, for my enterprise, I love Courtney. For my enterprise, I'm going to make like non-public information available to my employees to use. So this is great when you're talking about things like technical manuals, HR policies, but it's really easy to poison that well. And so you start putting malicious code into a large language model, and if somebody's not paying attention, all of a sudden it can start spitting out exploits when you thought you had done something really good to help your employees be more productive. So it's just one of those things where like, and I think a lot about myself as a data scientist, because one of the things that the keynote speaker at Black Hat said is like, no corporate arms races are not waged with a thought towards security, right? And so like, and they're not won. And the whole like mantra of Silicon Valley is move fast and break shit. And so I, as a data scientist, I never gave a shit about security. I didn't. I never even thought about it. Like I would send my boss a behavior model, and he would send it back and be like, hey, you should have fewer variables going into this function because the like code injection and things like that. Like we would get kind of like bare bones feedback on how to avoid code injection exploits, but never were we given like a full bore class on data science security or on model security. And so most of these models are not written with the idea that bad shit can get put into them.
Right. So do you think having private access LLMs is going to be the answer to that, where it's like OpenAI sells you your own LLM so that you can have that exchange, but it's not shared with the wider internet, or a clean LLM or something like that?
Yeah. Well, one is I'd like to understand. I still don't understand how these models are being built, if not with other people's information, right? Like, so yeah. And so I think companies are going to do it because I think it's a great way to be able to make non-public information available internally in a more efficient way. But I think it's going to get really expensive really fast. So I think what's going to happen is a lot of companies are going to deploy these things. And when they start to see how expensive it is for their employees to just be hammering query after query after query, I think they're going to start to pull back on it a little bit, because the compute associated with this thing is actually not cheap. So it's going to happen. But then it's great, right? Because there'll be a whole nother layer of security product just for protecting large language models, right? This will be like a whole nother, like, we're going to create a problem and then we're going to charge people to solve it.
Isn't that the fundamental business model of IT? I mean, that's just how it
Yeah,
works.
capitalism.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and but
that's really what's
you're
going to
totally
happen,
right.
though, isn't it?
Yep. I mean, did you see? I mean, the original investment from Microsoft into OpenAI was something like $1 billion in GPUs, and that's just only going to keep going up. And
Yeah.
it's like for Copilot, they want to charge something like $50 per user. Could you imagine? That's more than an E5 license. You know, and
Yeah.
so
Well,
yeah,
but the question is that going to be enough?
right.
Because that like people don't understand that they're currently still providing training material, which is why these things are being made available for free. And so the business tactic here is get people hooked on the output before they understand the true cost of it.
Oh, of course.
And then
I think that whole
basically
capitalism thing is still coming in there, but yeah, totally.
yeah. And I mean, at the end of the day, look, I think one of the hard things that everybody's sick of me talking about Web3, I'm sure, because I won't shut up about it. But I'm fascinated with the evolution of the internet. And I'm fascinated with Web3 as an open source movement. And the issue with AI is that open source is what has made AI as powerful as it is, but it's
Right.
also what makes it a huge threat. Because for every one of these things that we say, hey, look, we can use AI to find 0-day exploits we didn't know were there. Guess what? Attackers could use AI to find 0-day exploits that nobody knew was there. Like, hey, we can use AI to like find sophisticated attacks that circumvent the current, detections we have. Well, guess what? I can then build a model that circumvents that. And so it's what I freaking love about security, because it's this cat and mouse game of like every time you use something for good, somebody figures out a way to do something bad with it, and then you have to solve that problem. But it's one of these things that I was more concerned with a lot of the bad sides of AI that I heard than I was optimistic about the good sides of AI, right? Because you're talking about like the deep fake stuff is terrifying,
It
right? Like,
really
so
is. But by the way,
you gotta go
I think
ahead. Yeah.
that's where, from a legal perspective, building your image databases like your deep fakes, for example, you're building that off of other people's content. I think that's where the legal side is going to get involved and shut that
Yeah.
down, because
Yeah.
it's very clear you're using other people's work product to produce this. And so this is where, example, I think OpenAI, for example, is going to get its butt sued off because of this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And I wrote something recently about how
Mhm.
all of this stuff is really just going to create more haves and have-nots of privacy, and that you are only going to be able to have privacy from being included in these large language models. And not just large language, right? Generative AI is everything: images, videos, audio, and only people who have the money to either sue to get their copyrighted content out or to pay to block it are going to be able to do that. And it's not my favorite. Like,
Yeah, I mean, I've given up. I mean, it's either get off the internet or
yeah,
your information is gonna get used in one way or the other. That's just all
yeah,
there is. And so
yeah. And then the only thing that I am relying on is that at this point, anybody under 30 has never lived without the internet. And so we're going to get to a point, I think, where it's almost like when the NSA was stealing everybody's data. And then they were like, yeah, we've got like zettabyte upon zettabyte of it. But guess what? We have no tools to actually explore any of that data. So we're not doing anything with it. It's kind of like, I think we're going to get to that point with a lot of this training data. Where like there's so much of it, and that you've been being, and I like, it's interesting because like people talk to me sometimes about putting pictures of my kids on the internet for that reason and things like that, and like, oh well, if they're adults, what about their privacy? And it's just like, you literally can't walk down a populated street without being on somebody's camera. So I hate to say that I've given up, because I still have hope that we'll find regulations that protect people, but you can't unwind this at this point.
I mean, I came from the consumer information industry, and I got to tell you, that ship sailed years ago. the amount of information that's available to be purchased, especially, I mean, there are some protections in this country for minors, but not a lot. I mean, this is why, I mean, kids get
Thanks,
credit card
Reagan.
offers. I mean, yeah, exactly.
Well, I was
Yeah,
actually just watching Adam Eats the 80s, which is this television show about
right.
80s food, and it was talking about how it was illegal to advertise to kids until the
Yep.
80s, and then
Oh,
Reagan
yeah.
repealed all of those advertising laws, which was great because I grew up in the 80s, right?
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I mean, I think, I struggle with this a lot because I believe in privacy, but I also believe that we as a society are better together, and the more information we have, the better things we can do with it. And so, I mean, I feel that way about medical data. I feel that way about a lot of personal data. And I think it's like the great question of the 21st century is how do you balance the need for privacy with the understanding that data is powerful and we can actually do really good things with it? And then how do you keep people from doing really bad things with it?
It's the USA versus Europe, especially with GDPR, where there's actual real regulations around how your personal data is used, where in the United States, that's few and far between. I mean, healthcare data, there's a certain amount of regulations around. There's some protections of your consumer financial data, but otherwise, it's just a free for all. And finding that
Yeah.
balance is going to be very, very difficult. I mean, you already see, I think, Europe's making a calculated, the EU is making a very calculated decision that they're going to start putting curbs on LLM and AI activity now, which is
Yeah.
potentially going to be detrimental to their economy, but in the name of protecting personal choice, freedom, and information. So,
Yeah.
which I think is very, which is very valid. So, how do you find that middle ground? It's going to be tough. I think it's the question for the next decade.
Yeah. Well, and again, the Western kind of mindset of growth at all costs isn't one that is able to live symbiotically with privacy. So we do at some point. And my big thing, and so this has always been something I thought was an interesting use for blockchain, is identity protection. So basically, if you had your own identity blockchains where each chain is like the pieces of your identity that you would use for a specific purpose. So like, this is my healthcare identity. This is my finance identity, right? So my healthcare identity doesn't have stuff about my credit score in it because it doesn't need to. Whereas my finance data doesn't have stuff about my healthcare in it because it doesn't need to. And so I've always thought that was a really interesting concept, is if you used your own identity and then they could push algorithms to you that would run on the endpoint with your identity, that you could still use people's personal information, but it would give you a better way to track and be compensated for the use of your personal information. Because that's the part that pisses me off. I don't mind my personal data being used and sold, but I should be getting a licensing fee from that. Because if my clicks are worth X cents, I should get a piece of that.
Yeah, it's not bad. I could definitely see that. I just really wish, like, blockchain, for example, could be decoupled from the crypto grifters. So, because that's the thing. Yeah, exactly. I think blockchain has so much potential, but the people behind it, too many people behind it are holding it back. And so, because
Yeah.
there's definitely a lot of options there. It's exactly what you're talking about. More control, central identity, but it's just, right now that's just a mess.
Yeah. But so one of the other interesting things that I saw at Blackhat a lot, and actually quite a bit more at DEF CON, is, and I say this with a little bit of cynicism, but the federal government seems to be really pushing to foster public-private partnerships. So the National Cybersecurity Strategy came out a few months ago and really kind of made it clear, like, hey, the government's not getting this done on our own. We really need to partner with private enterprise. And that was something that was really, really kind of front of mind walking around summer camp. Is just, there were a lot of feds there. I met a lot of feds, and they all are very interested in, like, look, because I feel like before this, typically when you're talking to people from when you're talking to feds, it's basically, they're like, we hold the power. You need us. We don't need you. But now they're like, hey, we need you. We want to work with you. Help us understand how to better work with private enterprise. And so that to me is a pretty noticeable shift in attitude from, well, we're the largest consumer like we have the dominant buying power in the
Right.
country because we buy more than any other single entity. So you need us. Now they're like, actually, we need you to solve a lot of our problems.
Yeah, I've been impressed. I mean, I think the leadership on that side is really good, especially about reaching out. Some of the new DHS programs around cybersecurity, I think, are really innovative, and
Mhm.
especially partnering with critical infrastructure providers is critical. It's long overdue, and those
Yeah.
are the kind of things where I'm hoping they'll expand. But the problem is the politics behind it make it very hard to have a sustainable long-term program.
Yeah. Yeah. And I was talking to a handful of people about that, about the kind of annual budget cycles and how you spend like 25% of every year, not sure whether you should spend money or not because you have no idea what the next budget's going to look like. And that's something that we really, in the US, I think, we've struggled with is how to smooth out the transition period from term to term. It's weird. It's like we both don't have term limits. So we have people who've been around for way too long, but they
Right.
get elected way too frequently. So our policy just kind of ping pongs,
Oh, exactly.
back and forth. Um,
Yeah,
but
I
yeah,
couldn't agree more, and I think those are critical long-term policy implications. Because, like AI, for example, you need consistent policies because this is the kind of thing it's going to take off, and the policies that we have now are gonna play a big role 5 years from now. It's five
yeah.
you start making policies 5 years from now, like the next administration, it's too late.
Yeah. Well, and you also need to make international, so the US needs to make national decisions with international information. Like, believe it or not, the internet goes beyond North America. So
Really, I had no idea.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, and it's fascinating, right? Because I think the federal government's always thought that they had, through intelligence and military and things like that, had a pretty good feeling for what's going on in other countries, and the reality is they absolutely do not.
exactly.
So
Oh,
so having private enterprise with boots on the ground in countries, actually seeing what attacks are happening, what's working, what's not, what the trends are, is something that I think they're starting to understand, that they need a global picture to solve this problem, not just within the US.
Yeah, and I think that's the politics of it make it especially hard because we have to work with countries that we don't especially like in order to have this kind of information. You have to be able to exchange information. You have to be able to say, even though you are who you are, we need to work together on this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, a few times when the whole internet's been threatened, we've seen international collaboration, but it shouldn't take a near catastrophic event for countries to be able to come together around security.
We can keep hoping and dreaming. I mean, I think that'll be ideal. So what do you see for next year? So next year's Black Hat, what do you think is going to be? Is it just going to be marketing? Or are you going to see like solid improvement in these concepts that you're going to see throughout the security industry?
Everybody's going to be selling security for AI. Everybody. So I feel like next year's Black Hat, there's going to be like a whole row of booths that's just quality control for the data going into and coming out of generative AI. Because
That's too
that's
good.
the that like that's
Yeah.
the real, like, we're, as Cribl, we're in a freaking phenomenal position for this, right? Because, like, here's the other thing: is deploying one of these large language models internally requires having your shit together from a data classification perspective. And I know very few companies who are doing a really, really good job classifying their data, who really understand what PII they hold, what non-public information they hold, what data regulations they're even subject to. Um, I also think this new SEC reporting rule, right? So the SEC just released this rule that SEC registered companies have to disclose material security breaches within 4 business days,
Yeah.
or request an extension from the U.S. Attorney General, which is
Interesting.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I also think there's going to be like a new layer of service providers providing
So what's a
compliance
material breach?
services.
There's going to be a lot of splitting of hairs there.
Well,
But
they're
I,
also now required to publish that.
right.
So they
Yeah.
also now have to. So I think you'll see another layer of like service providers just for documenting your security policies and procedures.
Yeah, I think the fallout there, especially also with cyber insurance, it's going to get ugly for certain companies.
Yeah. No, I published last year in our predictions, I published a theory that by this year, like within the next year or two, very few small and mid-sized businesses will be able to have an actual independent security function. Like they will all have to use MSSPs, because I think it'll be more or less impossible to get insured, or impossible from a cost perspective to get insured unless you're using a service provider.
I agree. I mean, from a staffing, technology, expertise, for small and mid-sized businesses, it's getting harder and harder to exist with independent staff.
Yeah. Yeah. But so I think the TLDR for me is AI is a very broad term for a lot of things. So do I think that AI and security is a positive thing? Yes, I do. Is it better to do something with the 75% of alerts that SOCs just aren't looking at right now? Yes. And do I think that we should be letting AI make broad decisions when it comes to security? Abso-freaking-lutely not. So I think you can do a really good job of triaging things as they come in, and then letting humans do the nuanced work. But I am not one of the big, like, everybody's going to lose their jobs people. I feel like jobs are just going to change.
Yeah,
which as they have throughout the history of automation.
You're absolutely right. Things are going to change. I think it's critically important to be realistic with what AI is going to do. Put reasonable controls in place, especially managing your data is critically important. So I think I'm looking forward to it. I just think there's companies are going to have trouble. They're going to make bad decisions. They're going to have to recover from it. And so
one thing I would like to encourage our federal friends to consider is plain language standards for AI models. So we need to come up with a one-pager that is required of large language models and things like that. This is what this model is. This is the type of machine learning it's using. These are the data sources that it's pulling them from. These are the things that it's optimizing for. Because that is really the key to understanding AI, is if you don't understand what a model is optimizing for, you're never going to fully understand the model. So that's the next thing I think we need to start to conquer, is how do we bridge via reporting the technical to the real world applications of these, so that everybody can be on the same page about what exactly is happening inside a model.
Yeah, I think that's excellent recommendations. So anything that you want to say in wrapping up, or you think you got it all?
I want to thank everybody who came out to our different events. We had a happy hour at the House of Blues that was packed. We were at capacity for a couple hours of it. It was such a good time. And I want to encourage everybody next year to come visit us and to attend our parties, because Hacker Summer Camp is the most fun you will have all year if you do it right.
Yep. Very good. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was really great to see everyone. And I really appreciate, so commenters, Chris, thank you. Bradley, Ken, really appreciate it. And Courtney, thank you. We really appreciate everyone being here. And let us know. Both Jackie and I are active on the Twitter. I'm not even going to call it X, because it's just not.
No, I deleted my account, so you're gonna have to get at me on LinkedIn. I did. I am not on
that's why I couldn't tag
thing
you,
anymore.
because you deleted your account. Wow, there you go.
Yeah, so you can talk smack to me on LinkedIn though.
There you go. Yeah, I'm gonna have to move over to LinkedIn, which is unfortunate, because this, but it is what it is.
Yeah,
but
thanks
really
a lot,
appreciate everyone's time. Jackie, thank you for your insights. I can't wait till next year's Blackhat.
Yeah, thanks.
Take care. Have a great weekend.
You too.